Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kpoto, and I am a family educator here at INCLUDEnyc, and we're so excited to have you join us today on our live stream. It is one series of live streams that we air on the third Thursday of every month at noon. I also want to welcome our guest, Mack Rosenberg. She is the president of the New York chapter of the National Autism Association.
Thank you so much, Kpana. I'm really happy to be here today and to share information, learn from each other about wandering issues. They're so important to our families.
Very, very. So before we get into this live stream, I just want to tell you a little bit about INCLUDEnyc. We are a New York City nonprofit serving parents and families of children with disabilities and youth with disabilities. So I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to keep this under an hour. We want to inform you, we want to empower you, and we want to engage you. So in order to engage you, we encourage you to use our chat box, send us questions, send us comments, and we'll try our best to get to all of them. I also want to let you know that we have a great resource packet that was sent to you by email. Please be sure to check your email because we have a lot of great resources, and I want to thank you, Kim, for all the resources that you provided. So, okay, let's get into it. We're going to talk about wandering and autism today. So, Kim, can you tell us, just in case some of the people who are here today don't know what wandering is, what is wandering?
Sure. So wandering, very simply put, is any time a child or an adult with autism or another disability leaves a safe area, whether that's home, an environment where they're with family members or a caregiver, or school, leaves that safe area, and they're at risk once they leave that area and they're unsupervised. Some people call it bolting or running. A more technical term is elopement that's used. But it's basically leaving a safe area and ending up in a potentially unsafe situation. Okay.
So, I just want to let everybody know that this topic is very personal to me. I'm a 9-year-old. I have a 9-year-old son who's on the autism spectrum. So anytime I hear about wandering or any instance of a child going missing, it really hits home, and I know it hits home for a lot of parents.
Right, and me too. I have a 17-year-old. So I think many parents, and statistically, almost 50% of children with autism wander at one time or another. So it's not just something that is a worry for parents, It's a reality for parents of kids with autism. And about a third of kids with autism actually wander on a weekly basis.
Wow, that is
or try to wander on a weekly basis. So the statistics really are alarming, and parents need to be aware.
And I have to admit, as much as we hear about it on social media about kids wandering in the news, I did not realize that it was that high, that the stats were that high. So can you share with us a little bit, why does it happen? Why would someone wander?
Sure. So there are basically two major categories of reasons that individuals would wander. And that's either to get away from a situation, a person, or an event that they're finding aversive and they want to escape from, or it's to leave to go to something they're attracted to. So for example, an aversive situation might be one where there's someplace where the sensory input that's coming in is just too overwhelming for them. There's too much noise, there are too many people, it's too warm. It could be a variety of triggers for different children. And they want to get away, so they escape. If they're attracted to something, for example, trains or water or a particular store, a child might try to elope in order to get to that place. Okay. So parents, and we'll talk more about this, you really need to be aware of both the things that trigger your child possibly to escape, and also the things to which your child might be attracted and want to get away from you or away from school or a caregiver in order to get to.
Okay, so we're going to go into that a little bit more later, just some of the things that could trigger a child who may have a tendency to wander. So let's talk about prevention, because I'm sure a lot of parents who are listening want to get an idea of how can they prevent this from happening. We've already heard that the stats are so high. So what can parents do to keep their children safe?
Sure. So prevention is actually, it's the first step. The 3 steps we really need to look at with wandering are prevention, education, and then response if a child does wander. So for prevention, there are a lot of things parents can do, and you have to work also with your community and with your school in partnership to help keep your child safe. But at home, you can do things like install window alarms and door alarms on exterior doors. If you're living in an apartment building, your apartment door. Some kids actually do really well with, and this is simple and inexpensive. You print off a red stop sign off a website, or you make one yourself, and put that on doors and you teach your child, when you see the stop sign, you stop. And that can be used at home, it can be used in school, it can be used anywhere. There are locks that you can buy, so if you travel, you can put it on a hotel or motel room door, something like that, to add an extra level of safety. You can have, and there are devices that a lot of parents use to help track their child. And there are a variety of different devices, lots we can talk to parents about. We probably can't even fit it all in an hour. We could have an hour to talk about those different types of devices, but we can give some general tips about what you might want to look for in a device and how you might even find multiple devices.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought all of that up, because it's really a multi-pronged approach when it comes to prevention. There's no one size fit all. So for example, I have heard stories of parents who have the deadbolts, and the child figures out how to get past the deadbolt. Right? There are some children who may not want a tracking device on them. They may have sensory issues. So you may have to try something else. Or you may have to try several things at once.
Right, or a different type of tracking device.
Exactly.
They're all, for some of the tracking devices, for parents who don't know, are worn on the wrist or on the ankle, and for some kids that's just too much of a, it's chafing. It's
I know my son would not wear something on his wrist.
I'm not sure that mine would. That mine would either.
Right.
And for the kids who may figure out the door locks, that's why inexpensive door alarms that you can just pick up at any big box home improvement store can be a great addition to your safety measures, because that way, if the deadbolt is pulled or they figure out the chain lock, then the alarm sounds, and everyone hears it. One thing I do want to add as we talk about this is that some parents have said to me personally, and I've heard elsewhere, that they feel that they may need to lock their child in their room at night. And I just always caution parents to keep in mind that in the event of a fire, that can actually create a really dangerous situation.
It's scary.
If the fire or the smoke is between you and your child and you can't get them safely out. So that's why we talk about particularly using exterior alarms and locks.
Okay. That's a great point that you raised, Kim. Now with the tracking devices, I know some of them have subscription fees. Some parents may be able to afford it, some may not. So I just want everyone to know there's something out there for everyone. There's some really inexpensive ways that you can try to keep your children safe. I know, Kim, you already talked about the stop signs. I know some parents use social stories to try to teach their children how to stay safe in the home and in the community. So I say use what's best for you, what's best for your wallet, but at the end of the day, we all have to do what we have to do to keep our children safe.
Right, and we've included in the resource packet for parents some links to various resources where you can read about all different types of tracking devices. And even for those that have a subscription service, there may be some ways to work with that provider or find a scholarship through an organization that may help be able to fund that for you.
So another thing you had mentioned, the stop sign, and I'm familiar with the big red safety box that the National Autism Association has. Can you tell parents a little bit about that, how they can get it?
Sure. So we've actually included some of the background materials that are from the Big Red Safety Box in the digital download for people. Otherwise, you can go to the National Autism Association website and there's information about how to purchase the box, and there are times of year that the boxes that you can also register to try to obtain a free Big Red Safety Kit, and it's great that, and it's our national organization that does that. You can also get the information through the AWARE website, which our national organization has set up. It's AWAARE.org, and there's lots more information on that website as well. But it includes, things like the stop sign that you can use, and information on how to set up a social story and things like that. And there are also other inexpensive things that you can get are temporary tattoos that you can use for when your child goes on a field trip. There are tags that you can use to identify, and we can talk about concerns about identifying your child and how you identify your child on things that they're wearing. But a component of prevention that we haven't touched on yet is in the school. When kids are away from a parent or a caregiver, we saw unfortunately with Avante Akindo, a horrible situation where he left school. So some parents, and I know you and I have spoken about this, actually get wandering goals written into their IEPs.
Right. So when it comes to the IEP, and this was something I learned from the Big Red Safety Box, there's actually a template included where you can, tailor this letter to your child and have it submitted to your IEP team to let them know that you want to have goal-directed elopement included as a parent concern on your child's IEP. There are also safety goals that you can have included to make sure that your child is supervised at all times. And one thing I'll tell parents, when you try to do this, you might get some pushback. They might say, we always watch your child. You don't have to worry about it. But you know what? The IEP keeps everybody accountable and keeps everybody aware that your child has a tendency to wander and has wandered before. So this is just something I want to let parents know, that this is an option. You can have it included in the parental concerns.
And if you're getting a lot of pushback from your school or your school district, one thing you can also do is have your pediatrician or family practitioner write a letter, possibly using the wandering medical code that exists now, to really demonstrate to the school or the school personnel that this is very real and your child is very much at risk. I think one of the important goals that parents should make sure is written into any plan like that is that if the child goes missing, that 911 is called immediately, and that the parents are called immediately. That the school doesn't try to take an hour or two to find the child before anyone knows that the child's missing.
And I just want to stress, this is a serious issue. This is not a game. This is not a joke. Children have died after wandering. I just want to repeat that, right? So this is a life and death issue. This is a very serious issue. So if you're getting pushback, you have to stand up and you have to advocate for your child. Don't let it slide. Don't say, but the school said no. No, it's not an option.
Or that the school says, we're watching.
Right, we're always watching.
Because all it takes is a few seconds for a child to get away. And be potentially in danger. And I think, it's also important not only to have these goals on paper, but to make sure that, for example, if your child has an aide or there's a classroom aide, and the aide, your permanent aide may know about it, but if there's someone who comes in as a substitute, someone at the school needs to communicate to that person that your child is a wanderer. They're not going to intuit it on their own. They need to be educated about it so that they know what they're looking for and they know to be particularly hypervigilant with your child.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, because yes, we can have something on a piece of paper, right? But at the same time, everyone in that school building has to be aware. All the staff, like the average school might have one school safety officer or two school safety officers. There could be one day the school safety officer could glance down for a second and that's all it takes, right? But at the same time, if he's paying attention and he sees your child wandering towards the entrance of the school, he can be able to tell the child to come back. So that's something that I think is so important for school staff to be aware.
And I think the other thing school staff needs to be aware of in the event a child goes wandering is that you make sure as a parent that the school, in the main office, in the child's main file, that there's a current picture of your child.
Yes,
we're going to talk about the family plan in a little bit, but the school should also have that current picture.
Oh, okay. So someone is asking, what letter do we use for the IEP, right? To submit to the IEP team. So basically it's a letter letting the school-based IEP team know that your child engages in goal-directed elopement. There is a sample of the letter in the Big Red Safety Box. If you need help getting this together, trying to put a letter together, please call our helpline. I'm going to give that information toward the end.
And there should be, I think the sample letter is actually in your digital downloads as well.
Yes. Okay. So we're getting some questions in, so pardon me with the pause. We really welcome everything that everyone is saying. So we'll try our best to get to your questions. So now we want to talk a little bit about in the community, right? How can we keep our children safe in the community? So we've talked about the IEP, we talked about the school, we talked about making sure that everyone is aware, having something on paper, having something documented. But our kids, they spend some hours in school, but they also spend a lot of time at home, in the neighborhood, in their community. How can we keep our children safe in the community?
So your community can actually be an important part of your safety planning. When you take your child you may have a favorite store that your child likes to go to. If you're comfortable sharing that your child has autism with the people who work at that store, you're in there frequently, they can also then be alert if they see your child unaccompanied.
Right.
Can let you know, or can let a law enforcement official know that they saw an unaccompanied child who they know has autism. Same thing with neighbors. If you have trusted neighbors that you share that information with and have them have emergency contact for you. If you live in an apartment building and there's a doorman or a super or someone who's monitoring the door, they should know you have a child with autism, particularly as kids get a little bit older and more typically developing kids, maybe at 10 or 11, 12, run out to the store on their own.
Right.
The doorman doesn't think twice about it. If he or she is not alert to the fact that your child should not be leaving the building unaccompanied, they're not going to notice, and that's a missed opportunity to stop the child from eloping right there.
Right.
So community involvement really is an important part of keeping your child safe, particularly if they may wander. We're going to talk about law enforcement as far as responding, but you can also sort of try to build in law enforcement into your prevention plan too, and do a little education on your own. NAA, our National Autism Association New York Metro chapter, has actually worked for several years with the NYPD to do training for desk sergeants at the NYPD. We've trained about 300 sergeants every year, and we bring in an internationally known autism risk trainer. His name is Dennis Debot. He lives down in Florida. On our list in the digital download, there's a link to his website that you can see. And the goal of that is to train these desk sergeants who then go back to their precincts and teach the officers who are on patrol more about autism. I've actually also gone to precincts and taught a roll call, taught a little bit about autism, and they don't, especially young police officers, don't always know. They have no idea what autism is, what it looks like, and some behaviors that some people with autism have can be concerning to police officers if they were, looking through the lens of what they expect typical behavior to be from someone that they're coming into contact with. So we do need to educate those first responders, not just police but fire and other safety officers about people with autism. But you can also, just as an individual or family, go to your local police precinct with your child and introduce your child to the concept that if they're lost, if your child is able to do this, that if they're lost, looking for a police officer might be a good choice, or they can approach a police officer. If they're verbal or have some sort of communicative device, they may be able to communicate to an officer that way. But also to introduce the police officers to a child with autism. Right. There are many members of the NYPD who have children with autism themselves, absolutely. But as I said, oftentimes, there are also many officers who are unfamiliar with it. Right. So, you put a face to your child, you put a face to your child who's in that community in your local precinct. And that's just, again, yet another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And I think that is so important where law enforcement comes in. I know too that as a parent of a young boy of color, there is some anxiety when it comes to him having to interact with law enforcement. We've all seen the stories in the news, and but it's a catch-22, right? Because law enforcement, they have to be trained. I think they should be nationwide. They should be trained. But at the end of the day, I really don't feel like it's happening at a rate that it should be happening. And it's really scary. It's really scary because you cannot look at somebody and tell that they're on the autism spectrum. So they could make a slight move and that could be it. So this is something I must admit, it does worry me, but it's a catch-22 because the training has to happen. And we will have to take our children to meet law enforcement so they become familiar with them, and just hope for the best.
Well, and it is, I think, a particularly difficult situation on all sides with the law enforcement question, because I also appreciate that, oftentimes law enforcement officials have to make split-second decisions about things, and children or young adults, and particularly as kids get older, I don't think a police officer would necessarily be threatened by a small child trying to reach for a shiny name tag or something like that. But if a young adult tries to reach out to grab something on an officer, that's worrisome from the police officer's perspective, and they're trained to react to that. So they need awareness of, I need to make a decision whether this person is a threat.
Right.
And that's where training comes in, and that's where introducing them to people with autism and providing them with information about how people with autism may behave is helpful, in just trying to continually educate them so that they can make those decisions appropriately.
Right. And this is another reason why I'm really glad that we're doing this today, because I really feel like, for me as a parent of a child, raising a child on the spectrum, I feel like autism awareness is all year round. And the more we can make people aware of what's going on and what our children are experiencing out in the world, the more aware they can be when they come in contact with one of our children. They can kind of understand why our children may act a certain way.
Right, because I think as parents of children with autism, we're surrounded by this idea of awareness, and we know
we live it all the time.
And there are things that we sort of understand to be part of our child's behavior patterns or triggers that we don't always realize other people aren't aware of or aren't educated about. So that's why community education can be so important.
It's so important. It's vital.
Like it is vital.
It's vital. So, we've kind of talked about prevention, and what parents can do. And I really encourage everyone to read through the packet that we send, because, we have a short amount of time today, and we're going to try to get through everything. But, there might be something that we may not have touched on, and we try to include as much information as possible in the resource packet.
So one of the things that's in the resource packet is sort of an outline for doing a family emergency plan.
Right.
And I really encourage families to do that. It's a very simple, couple of pages, but it outlines the steps you need to take. You should obviously have a current picture of your child. Keep in mind, if you can, what your child is wearing every day.
Yes.
And think about layers, particularly in the winter, because, you could send Susie to school in a pink coat and a blue t-shirt and, a red skirt.
Right.
And, if Susie wanders and the police say, what was she wearing? And you say she had on a pink jacket and a red skirt, and she's decided that coat she's just done with.
Too hot, yeah.
And then she's wearing, a blue shirt and a skirt, and they're not, they're looking for the girl in the pink coat. So try to be, and it's hard every day, we're trying to get out of the house. So, in the best of circumstances, try to be aware of what your child's wearing. Summer's easier, they're wearing one layer. And wandering is frankly much more prevalent in warmer months, because I think people are out more and children want to get outside more. There's more going on that may be attractive to them. So, fill out the family emergency plan, keep it somewhere handy. It also has really good tips of what you need to do if your child wanders and the steps you need to take. And I think it's really important to have that in a place where you can see it, because if your child does wander, you're going to panic. I mean, that's the natural reaction. So to be able to look down quickly and see that you should call 911 and see the information that you need to provide. We've also provided sort of a checklist for first responders of things they should be thinking about asking parents if a child wanders. I really encourage parents to look at those questions and have their own answers prepared, and be prepared to share that information with the first responders, because they may not know, depending on what kind of education they've received about autism and wandering, they may not know to ask questions, for example, about sensory triggers or aversions.
Right.
If your child's really sensitive to touch, it's important that
first responders
know that, because if you reach out to grab a child may bolt again, and what could have been an opportunity to get the child to safety actually sends the child, maybe running into the street into an even more dangerous situation.
Right. And I know there might be some parents listening who may be very concerned about sharing so much information with somebody outside your family. But just remember what I said before, this is a life or death situation, right? So we may have to go outside our comfort zone and share more information than we would normally do with strangers, with somebody at the deli, with the police officer. These are all people that we're going to have to encounter in our daily lives, and It's just one of those things that we have to live with. So somebody's talking about their son who is 15 but acts like a 3-year-old cognitively. So there is some concerns, and it's that this parent has a child of color. So this is a very real issue where some, like you had mentioned, a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old going out into the community, and somebody looking at that person sees them as a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old, but they might try to play with the badge, as you mentioned.
Right.
And the police officer might see that and react. So that's why I think education is so important. Okay, education is important of law enforcement officers and everybody in general, just so they can be made more aware. Okay, we have somebody else asking. They just had the IEP meeting this morning.
So
can it be added before the ink dries? Yes, it can.
You can always you can always reconvene your IEP.
It's not too late. I will just tell you this. Whenever I have my IEP meeting, I take the draft, and it is a draft. I take it home. I mark it with a red pen, scan it, and send the corrections back and ask it to be added. It's added, and I get the finalized copy. So no, it is not too late. It's not too late.
And the sample letter is in the digital download packet that you have. So it's there for you. You can adapt it to fit your child's needs in the school.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was sending them to the big red safety box. But okay, so everyone who registered can get a copy. Okay.
And if it's not there, let us know and we can get you
Okay, so somebody just had an elopement episode. I'm so sorry, because I know how scary that can be, and you need information on tracking devices. Our resource packet has some other devices that may work for your child. I definitely encourage you to check it out so you can get some more information on it. So you had touched a little bit about what parents can do when their child does wander, right? Because we do everything. We try to be vigilant. It's only human. Mistakes may happen. There have been children who have wandered while the whole family was asleep. They did everything they were supposed to do.
Absolutely.
What should a family do when a child wanders?
So the first thing you need to do is call 911.
Okay, call 911.
You need to get, professional law enforcement looking for your child right away. Mm-hmm. Clearly provide them the information that's on your family emergency plan. This is where the plan kicks in and is critically important. Mm-hmm. If your child, and encourage the first responders to check particularly dangerous locations first. And I'm going to talk about water in particular. Mm-hmm. But if your child happens to like, traffic signals, the road, a nearby road may be the first place you want to check. Nearby sources of water should always be one of the first places checked. The statistic, thankfully, there are lethal outcomes in wandering. Thankfully, many children are found and returned safely to their family. Yeah. But where there are lethal outcomes, over 90% of those are drowning deaths. So water should be a target for anyone, and many children with autism are very attracted to water. And when you and I were speaking before, I said, sometimes I forget that we kind of live on an island here, and in New York City,
live on islands,
and there is more water around than you would think. If you actually look at a map of the 5 boroughs, when you start to take into account, parks and streams and the East River and the Hudson River and the Gowanus Canal, and there's water all over the place, even fountains.
Yeah, and
parks.
I'm glad you mentioned fountains, because when we talk about water, some people might be thinking about rivers and ponds, but I'll just give you a story. We took our son to the Bronx Zoo, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the area where the seals are. Now that's water, right? He saw it and he's like, take a bath. And that scared me, because if he were to wander off, that could be somewhere where he ends up.
Right.
So I just want you to know that all water. Don't just think of the big bodies of water. Just think of all water.
And it doesn't even have to be, particularly with young children.
Right.
It doesn't even have to be deep water.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very shallow water. A fountain that's 18 inches deep is a big hazard, especially for a young child. Yeah. One of the things we always encourage parents to do is to, as early as possible, and if possible with your child, to get them swimming lessons. So they maybe even just have some very basic swimming skills, that they could learn how to float or to dog paddle. Any swimming skill can be important if they enter water. And there are special needs swimming programs. I know there are programs that are free that parents can obtain if cost is an issue for getting swimming. There are swim instructors who specialize in children with special needs. and who understand some of the triggers for our kids and how to work, more gently with them.
Right. And talking about swimming, I just want to encourage everyone, if you're looking for a swimming program, please call our helpline. I'm going to share, that info with you a little bit later. And if you're concerned about funding, if your child has a Medicaid waiver, there might be ways that you can get swimming paid for. But it's definitely something that, it's a skill that our kids could, should have. But, even with that, it's still not 100%, right? So basically, we're just trying everything to try to keep our children safe.
And, wandering is not, and I think, we really want to reinforce this for parents, it's not bad parenting if your child wanders.
Right.
A child with autism can disappear in an instant. Our kids
That's
are really
takes.
Smart, and sometimes they know what they want or they know what they want to get away from, and you turn your back, and, if you're at, particularly if you're at a family barbecue or a family picnic, and I'm talking to, my cousin who I haven't seen for 6 months, and I turn my back for 2 minutes.
All it takes is 1 second.
All it takes is a second for a child to wander. So in those situations, it can also be helpful if you have maybe people you can tag team with to keep an eye on your child, so that everyone can enjoy an event like that for at least part of the time, and then someone's watching the child at all times as well.
And I want to talk about tag teaming. It's so important, right? I know there might be some parents who may not have family around who can tag team with them. If you have support staff, that's someone that you can consider part of your team.
Yes.
Because I remember there was one summer a couple of years ago where I decided to take my son to this event at a park, right? It was in Westchester. And he went on the roller coaster, and I made the mistake of being on the wrong side. I was on the entrance waiting for him when I should have been at the exit. So I'm, the roller coaster goes around, it comes back, and I'm waiting for him to get off. And then I realized I was standing at the wrong spot. So I move over to where I was supposed to be, and I asked the attendant, "Where's my son?" He's like, "Oh, he left." My heart stopped. He told me he left. That was the scariest 10 minutes ever. Like, I didn't even know how I was going to explain that to anybody. And I know the first thing I was going to be asked is, "Where were you? Why weren't you paying attention?" Where was he? He was hanging off a garbage can right behind me. I was calling him and he didn't answer. So I just want to say that it can happen in a split second. I was there. It's just that I was standing at the wrong spot, and the attendant I'm like, how could you let a child just walk off? I would think the first thing he would do is call out for the parents, but he didn't. So things happen. Things happen all the time. You could be as vigilant as possible, and things happen. And that's why we have to try to put as many measures in place as possible and educate as many people as possible to try to get people aware of what's going on.
I want to touch back, this is sort of a prevention and in case your child wanders point, and going back to water, because it is so critical.
Right.
It's not so much, this part of it is not so much of an issue in Manhattan, but in other boroughs it is, where people may have swimming pools, or their neighbors may have swimming pools, on Staten Island or Queens, parts of Brooklyn, where it's a little less urban and vertical looking than it is in Manhattan. There are swimming pools around, and swimming pools can be very attractive to children with autism. If you have a pool of your own, there are devices you can buy that go into the pool when no one is swimming that set off an alarm if there's a splash in the pool. So along with fencing and other safety measures that you might have in place, that might be something to, I think they're relatively inexpensive, and that might be something to consider. Even if you don't have a pool, if your neighbor has one, maybe you spend a little bit of money if you can to buy one for your neighbor's pool if your child's very attracted to that body of water.
Okay. Now, I know earlier, I just want to touch on this real quick. Somebody had asked a question about the MTA and how we can get them aware. I mean, hey, that would be great. If you want to contact your government official to try to get, an MTA awareness campaign going, that would be great, because millions of people ride through the MTA every day. And the more people that we can get educated on this issue, the better.
And it is an important one for a number of reasons too, because children with autism are often very attracted to trains. They know the train schedule better than any of the rest of us. They could, draw the map of the New York City subway system for us, and getting on the subway system and being able to travel around is very attractive to a lot of children. Another issue is that even when children have wandering devices, many of those devices don't track if they're underwater. So if they're underwater, I'm sorry, if they're underground.
Right.
I saw a question about a pool
So
and got
somebody's asking
distracted.
about the pool alarm. They want to know how they can get a pool alarm. Sarah.
Sarah, I believe you can order, Sarah, you can order them on, I believe Amazon has them.
Okay.
So you can also Google pool alarm, but I think I've seen them on Amazon.com. So if your tracking device doesn't work underground, awareness from MTA personnel can also be a big issue. One of the things we haven't talked about yet, and it's information that you should be providing to first responders if your child wanders,
right.
is whether or not what your child's spoken verbal capacity is.
Yes, that's a good
because
point.
a significant percentage of children who wander, a third plus of children who wander are unable to tell someone their name,
right.
or their address or their phone number. So it's important that the people looking for your child
They're aware.
know that. So that if they call your child's name, your child may not respond.
Right.
It's all part of the of the awareness of how to locate your child and safely stop the wandering event.
Right. And some of our children, some of them are nonverbal, some are verbal, and some fall in that gray area, like my son, where they can talk, but they're not able to hold a conversation. So if you said, "Where do you live?" he may or may not answer, or he may say "live." He may repeat the last word that he heard. So it's very important for people encountering your child to be aware of their verbal ability.
Right.
It's so important.
And even if your child is verbal and even conversational, if your child is very stressed out, if they've wandered and now they realize they've wandered and they're lost and they don't know what to do, they may be under too much stress to provide that information and respond appropriately.
Right. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about so this issue of tracking devices has been in the news, right? We're all aware of Kevin and Avante's law. It's currently stalled in Congress. We don't really know what's happening with this current Congress. I haven't heard anything about it. But pretty much it seeks to expand existing funding for people with Alzheimer's to be able to get tracking devices, right? For people with developmental disabilities. So they want to extend this funding to people with developmental disabilities. There's been some concerns. Two main concerns regarding this law, potential law I should say, would be privacy of the person wearing the device. And you had mentioned this before when we were talking earlier. It's not just children that wander. Adults on the autism spectrum also wander. Teenagers wander. It goes across the lifespan. Another issue is data being used for another reason other than just wandering.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on this, and what can parents do now? Because like we had mentioned before, everyone might not be able to afford a device. So what can parents do as far as engaging their elected officials regarding this law, this potential law? So
the easiest thing to do is to call your congressperson, to call your senator. Call Senators Gillibrander and Schumer. And I mean, Chuck Schumer has been a big advocate. He's been a sponsor of this bill.
Right.
He gets it, but it can never hurt to call or to write a letter. And your Congress people, your members of Congress, their staff have to track all the calls that come in.
Right.
And you'd actually be surprised by how few people call on any issue. I called a congressperson a couple of years ago for something, and I remember the person who answered the phone said, "Oh my gosh, we've been getting tons of calls on this today." And I thought,
wow.
You're getting hundreds of
So
and I said, I said, how many calls?
Yeah.
And I think she said something like 10 or 15. That's a lot of calls for them.
Okay,
so if
we
they
have work to do.
If they have hundreds of parents calling them, that's a huge number, and that makes them realize. And in the end, they're supposed to be responsible to their constituents.
Right.
So if they hear from you that this is an important law for them, for you, and for your family, and for children with autism. They will be more inclined to look at it more carefully and to respond positively.
Right.
On the data collection point, I believe that the drafts I've seen of the legislation try to address that, about not allowing the Department of Justice, for example, to use that information for other things. But again, this goes back to what you had mentioned about how parents have to sort of weigh how much personal information they're willing to share, whether you're just putting it out there in your neighborhood or whether it's on a device. With the risk to your child of wandering.
Yeah, so it's a catch-22, and I just want to acknowledge all the self-advocates, people who are on, adults on the autism spectrum who are speaking up. I know some of them do oppose this law, and, so it's really, it's a catch-22, and it's a really sticky subject, and I know there's been some tension between parents and self-advocates. I do support this because, my son is not able to advocate for himself, so I want him to be safe when he's out there. So I'm really hoping we can come to some kind of compromise. But so I do, as Kim said, I do encourage you to call.
And it is important to acknowledge that there are some self-advocates who do feel differently than you and I are talking about these devices. But as you said, we have children who in many cases can't advocate for themselves, can't get themselves from point A to point B. Maybe running away from something or running to something. It's a very different situation than a person who's able to independently navigate their environment.
Yeah. So, as we get toward the end of our talk here today, I just want to ask you, Kim, if you have any final words that you want to share with parents and anyone who's listening today regarding wandering and autism.
Sure. So one thing we haven't talked about very much yet, and it is an important piece of your prevention and your response, are the devices that families can use.
Oh yes. And somebody did ask, and I mentioned the packet, but it'll be good to mention some of them. Yes.
So we have some of them in the packet and some links that you can follow for even more detailed information about devices. And there really are a wide range of devices. I mean, there are some that include protections like geofencing, where you can set a safe perimeter for your child. So for example, if your child's a little more independent and maybe they can go within a 3-block radius of your home, you can geofence them in that way, and the minute they step outside, the device will alert you of that. There are devices that provide lots of information, like when your child gets on the school bus and how fast the school bus is going, which in and of itself can be really interesting information. But you want to look at, and there are devices that are wearable, there are devices that attach to clothing
or shoes.
There are sort of low-tech devices, high-tech devices. We've provided some information about medic alert bracelets. There's a program where you can get a free bracelet that your child can wear if your child will wear something like that. There are items with QR codes that can contain personal information about your child that can be scanned, but your child won't be wearing something. I'm always personally a little leery of things where a child's name is prominently displayed, because I think that a predator can use that to their advantage, and our children with autism are particularly vulnerable and susceptible to predators. So if you have something with, Johnny's name on it, and someone who has ill intentions toward that child says, "Oh, Johnny, Mom told me to come pick you up." That's that can be a very serious issue. If the name is hidden, in a luggage tag type thing that folds in, that's a very different situation. And it may be also depending on where you live and how you commute. I had a friend who lives up in Westchester send me a device, or it was a tag that a child could wear on their shoe, but it had their name and their phone number and their address on it, and it was visible. And if your child is, on a school bus and in school and with mom and dad, that may be okay. If your child's sitting on the subway and someone just can look down and read what's on their shoe, it's a different situation. So you have to look at where you're living and, what your lifestyle is as well. But you should generally look toward what the battery life is for the device, whether it's water resistant, even if it's not, or if there are, accessories that can protect it from the water. Whether it will ping your location if you're in the water. Even if it's not waterproof or water resistant, if it gives you information close to water, then you'll know that water is definitely a place you want to check. You want to look for geofencing. It's not so much an issue here in the city, but if you're outside of the city, many of these devices rely on cellular service, so you want to make sure you have a strong cell signal. There are some radio frequency devices as well, which provide a different type of signaling. And if your child has one of those devices, you should make sure that law enforcement has the radio frequency number if they're trying to track your child. you need to look at the devices individually to see what meets your needs.
Right.
And different devices may meet different needs at different times.
Right. Mm-hmm.
For some parents, it can be something as simple as using, if your child you have a child who's more independent, it could be where's find my iPhone.
Right.
And as long as your child, doesn't tend to move away from their iPhone, that's a simple way to track a more independent child. But a lot of our children need something more significant than that.
Right.
And I know one person had put up a question that a particular device that's very popular didn't work for them. And it's true, that I'm familiar with that device. It's a great device. It's not the right device for every family. So
Right.
families need to, and you may have to try one or two. So we have a lot of potential devices, both low tech, high tech, at all different price points. We have links to in the digital download packet.
Yeah, so someone is asking if there's a device that can gauge the height from the ground as if a child is in a building that has multiple floors.
Oh,
Ooh, that's
I don't know. That's
a technical one.
So I'm assuming this is from Sylvester. I'm assuming you're thinking if your child gets away from you in an apartment building,
you
for
can
example,
tell what floor the
you
child
can tell
is on.
what floor they're on.
Now that would be a question for the manufacturer.
Right.
I'll admit that to you. I am not sure, but I would hope that it will be able to pinpoint where the
or maybe
child
even
is.
how many feet
How many
away the
feet away,
child is, and then
exactly.
you can say, okay, someone go up, someone go down,
Right.
and look for the child.
Yeah. So Kim, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with everyone?
I think I just want to reiterate to families that this really is, and many of you are here because it's an important issue to you, and you may have experienced wandering. As I said, about half of kids with autism are going to wander. Many of them are going to be nonverbal or minimally have minimal spoken language capabilities, and if they wander, they may not have a communicative device with them. Mm-hmm. It's so important to have an emergency plan in place for your family, with your school, to really partner with your school and other places. If your child's in an after-school program,
Mm-hmm.
you want to partner with the people who are with your child the most. Mm-hmm. To keep them safe. I encourage families to look into the Big Red Safety Box. If you can get one, they provide a whole range of supports to families
Right.
with children who wander. Mm-hmm. But put that family emergency plan in place so that if you have a wandering event, you have the information you need at your fingertips to provide first responders with the information they need to hopefully quickly and safely locate your child and return them to you.
Yeah. And, as far as my final words, I just want to tell everyone, just be as vigilant as possible. Supervise your child at all times, but at the same time, just remember, we're all human, right? And that's why we try to share as much information with you today. We try to give you as many prevention tips. We try to give you information on what you can do if your child does wander. And I strongly encourage everyone to check out our resource packet. Just try to get as much information as you can on this issue, because this is a very serious issue that has been going on for a very long time. Okay, somebody's asking for the helpline number. I'm just going to go ahead and give it because I know I've talked about it a few times. This is our helpline card. Let me see. I hope you guys can see it. And basically, it's an intake line that you will call. The number is 212-677-4660 or 212 for Spanish, 212-677-4668. So when you call, you can call us and we'll have our intake coordinator get some information from you and try to provide you with as much information and resources as possible and help as well. So we encourage everyone to call. So as far as, final words, just know that just be as vigilant as possible, supervise your children at all times, and be kind to yourself. Go easy on yourself. I do realize it can be very stressful. Just raising a child in general can be challenging, right? But at the same time, our kids bring us a lot of joy, and that's something I always want us to remember. I do want to thank you, Kim, so much. I really, I learned a lot from you, and I do appreciate all the resources that you provided us here today.
Oh, my pleasure. And
yeah.
Families can also contact us at National Autism Association.
Right.
Our website is nationalautismny.org, and all our further contact information is there, and you can reach me or you can reach someone else at our organization. We're happy to provide information as well.
Yeah, so, if you have a friend or family member who missed this live stream, they can check out our website or the National Autism Association your chapter's website to be able to see it. Is going to be on our YouTube channel as well. So I totally encourage everyone to check it out later if you want. If there's something that we missed that maybe you might want to check later, please check us out. And we do have another live stream coming up in April. We're going to be talking about early intervention to CPSC. So for those of you with really young children who may need preschool special ed, definitely check out. It's going to be April 20th with Marilyn Rubenstein from the Manhattan Early Childhood Direction Center. Kim, I just have to say thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kpana. It's been a pleasure. I've learned from you as well. So
yes, I learned a lot from you, and this was really great to be able to share this information with everyone who joined us today. And once again, thank you for joining INCLUDEnyc Live, real conversations on parenting and disability. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.